The wagon wheel cracked like a gunshot in the gathering darkness, and Winona Lancaster knew immediately that her carefully planned journey had just become a fight for survival. She had been traveling alone through the California wilderness for 3 days, making her way from San Francisco to the small mining town where her brother had supposedly struck silver. The November air of 1881 had grown steadily colder as she pushed eastward into the mountains, but she had been confident in her preparations. Now, as her wagon lurched violently to one side and her mare whinnied in alarm, all that confidence evaporated like breath on a winter morning. Winona managed to bring the wagon to a halt and climbed down to assess the damage. The rear wheel had split nearly in half, the wood splintered beyond any hope of repair. She crouched beside it, running her fingers along the brake, and felt her heart sink. The sun was already touching the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Now, those colors only reminded her how little daylight remained. She had passed through a small settlement called Riverside 2 days ago, but that was far behind her now. The nearest town ahead was at least another day's journey, and that assumed she had a working wagon. The wind picked up, cutting through her wool coat with alarming ease, and she noticed for the first time the dark clouds gathering in the north. They looked heavy and full of snow. Winona had never felt so alone. She was 23 years old, educated at a finishing school in Boston, and completely unprepared for this kind of crisis. Her brother Thomas had sent word 6 months ago about his silver strike, urging her to join him in building a new life out west. Their parents had died the previous winter from influenza, leaving Winona with nothing to keep her in Boston but memories. The journey had seemed like an adventure, a chance to start fresh in a place where the past could not follow. Now she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She unhitched her mare and led the animal to a cluster of pine trees a short distance from the trail. At least she could make some kind of shelter before the storm hit. She had blankets in the wagon, some food, and her father's old pistol, though she had never fired it. Winona had just started gathering fallen branches when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Her first instinct was fear. She had heard stories about the dangers faced by women traveling alone, about outlaws and drifters who preyed on the vulnerable. Her hand moved instinctively to the pocket of her coat where she had stashed the pistol, but she did not draw it, not yet. The rider came into view as the last rays of sunlight illuminated the trail. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dark brown duster that flapped in the wind. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could see he had a strong jaw and several days' worth of stubble. 2 horses trailed behind his own, both laden with supplies. He slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a gesture that seemed meant to be reassuring. "Evening, miss," he called out, his voice deep and steady. "Looks like you have run into some trouble." Winona straightened, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "My wheel broke. I was just about to make camp." The rider dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, and they assessed her situation with a quick, intelligent glance before returning to her face. "Name is Nathan Wyatt," he said. "I have been working a ranch up near Donner Pass, heading south for the winter. That wheel is not going to get you anywhere." "I had noticed," Winona said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. She immediately regretted her tone. This man had done nothing to deserve her frustration, and she needed help whether her pride wanted to admit it or not. Nathan did not seem offended. Instead, he looked up at the darkening sky, then back at the trees where she had been planning to shelter. "Storm is coming in fast. Big one, from the look of those clouds. We need to find better cover than this." "We?" The word came out before Winona could stop it. "I am not going to leave you out here to freeze, miss. There is an old mining cabin about 2 miles east of here, just off the main trail. Built it myself 3 years back when I was prospecting these hills. It is not much, but it has 4 walls and a roof. We can wait out the storm there." Winona studied his face, trying to read his intentions. Her mother had always told her to trust her instincts about people, and something about Nathan Wyatt felt solid, dependable. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to see what she wanted to see. "I do not even know you," she said quietly. "No, madam, you do not. But I know this country, and I know that storm is going to hit within the hour. You are welcome to take your chances here, but I would not recommend it." He turned back toward his horse, giving her space to decide. "I will help you load what you can carry onto your mare." The wagon will have to stay. The first snowflake landed on Winona's cheek, cold and wet. It was followed quickly by another, then another. The decision made itself. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Wyatt." "Nathan is fine," he replied, already moving toward her wagon. "Let us work fast." They moved with urgent efficiency, pulling her most essential belongings from the wagon. Nathan tied her trunk to one of his pack horses while Winona gathered her blankets, food supplies, and a small wooden box that contained her mother's jewelry and her father's letters. The snow was falling steadily now, fat flakes that swirled in the wind and caught in her hair. Nathan helped her onto her mare, then swung back into his own saddle. "Stay close," he said. "The trail gets narrow up ahead, and visibility is going to get bad fast." He was right. Within minutes, the snow had transformed from a gentle fall into a blinding storm. The wind howled through the pines, driving the snow horizontal and making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Winona kept her eyes fixed on the dark shape of Nathan's back, trusting him to guide them through the whiteout. Her face was numb with cold by the time he finally called out, "There, just ahead." The cabin materialized from the storm like a ghost, a small structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney. Nathan dismounted and pushed open the door, then came back to help Winona down from her mare. Her legs were so cold she could barely feel them, and she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. Nathan caught her elbow, steadying her. "Get inside," he said. "I will see to the horses." Winona did not argue. She pushed through the door into the cabin's dark interior, grateful to be out of the wind. The single room was small and sparse, containing little more than a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a simple bed frame in one corner, but it was dry and relatively warm compared to the storm outside. She heard Nathan moving around outside, the sounds muffled by the howling wind. He came in carrying an armload of firewood that he must have stored here, followed by several trips to bring in their supplies. Snow dusted his hat and shoulders, melting into dark patches on his duster. "Horses are secured in the lean-to outback," he said, setting down the last load. "It is not perfect, but they will be all right until morning." He moved to the fireplace and began arranging kindling with practiced hands. "Let us get some heat in here." Winona watched as he coaxed a flame to life, feeding it carefully until it caught and began to grow. The orange light pushed back the darkness, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She was safe, at least for now. Nathan stood and brushed off his hands, then removed his hat and coat. Underneath, he wore a faded blue shirt and worn jeans held up by leather suspenders. He looked solid and capable, the kind of man who belonged in this harsh landscape. "Thank you," Winona said, and meant it. "I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "You would have figured something out," Nathan replied, though they both knew that was probably not true. "Why do not you tell me what brings a lady like you out here alone?" Winona hesitated, then realized she owed him at least some explanation. She moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "I am traveling to meet my brother. He has a claim near a town called Silver Ridge. He wrote to me about 6 months ago, asking me to come west." "Silver Ridge? That is rough country. Mining towns always are." "I know, but I had nothing keeping me back east. Our parents died last winter, and my brother is all the family I have left." She glanced at him. "What about you? You said you were working a ranch near Donner Pass?" Nathan nodded, settling onto the floor with his back against the wall. "The Patterson Ranch. Good people, good work. But the winters up there are brutal. I usually head south around this time, pick up odd jobs until spring." He paused. "I prospected for a while, a few years back. Built this cabin as a base. Never found much, but I learned a lot about myself out here alone." "Like what?" The question surprised Winona. She was not usually so forward with strangers, but something about the intimacy of the fire-lit cabin, the storm raging outside, made normal social rules seem distant and unimportant. Nathan considered the question seriously. "I learned that I am not cut out for solitude. Some men thrive alone in the wilderness, but I need people around me. Conversation, laughter, shared work. That is why I gave up prospecting and went back to ranch work." "That is honest," Winona said softly. "Only way to be." He reached for one of the packs and pulled out some dried meat and hardtack. "Not much of a meal, but it will keep us going. You hungry?" They shared the simple food in comfortable silence, listening to the storm hammer against the cabin walls. The wind found every crack and gap, sending little drafts of cold air swirling through the room. Nathan fed more wood to the fire, building it up until the flames cast dancing shadows across the rough log walls. "Getting colder," he observed. "This is going to be a long night." Winona wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of just how cold she was. The fire helped, but the cabin was drafty and her clothes were damp from the snow. She tried to stop shivering, but could not quite manage it. Nathan noticed. He stood and moved to his pack, pulling out a thick wool blanket. "Here," he said, crossing to where she sat. "This will help." "What about you?" Winona asked, even as she reached for the blanket gratefully. "I have weathered worse." But even as he said it, she could see him suppressing his own shiver. Winona made a decision. "We can share it. There is no point in both of us freezing." Nathan looked uncertain. "Miss Lancaster, I do not want you to think—" "I think you saved my life today," Winona interrupted. "And I think we are going to need to stay warm if we want to survive until morning. Please, sit down." After a moment, Nathan settled beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Winona spread the blanket across both their shoulders, and the shared warmth was immediate and welcome. She could feel the solid presence of him beside her, smell the scent of leather and pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. "Tell me more about yourself," Nathan said after a while. "A woman who travels alone across California must have an interesting story." Winona smiled despite herself. "I am not sure how interesting it is. I grew up in Boston. My father was a banker, very respectable and very boring. My mother died when I was young, and he remarried a woman who made it clear I was not welcome in her home after he passed. That was 10 years ago. I went to finishing school, learned to be a proper lady, and spent the last few years teaching at a girls' academy." "You were a teacher?" "Literature and history. I loved it, actually. The girls were wonderful, so hungry to learn about the world beyond their parlors and drawing rooms." Winona's voice grew wistful. "But the academy closed last year. Not enough enrollment." That was when Thomas's letter arrived. "Sounds like fate," Nathan observed. "Maybe, or maybe just desperation." She glanced at him. "What about your family? You said you were not cut out for solitude, so I assume there are people who matter to you." Nathan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Had a wife once, Sarah. We married young, had dreams of building a ranch together. She died in childbirth 3 years ago. The baby, too." "Oh, Nathan, I am so sorry." "It was a long time ago." But the pain in his voice said otherwise. "After that, I kind of drifted. Took whatever work I could find. Never stayed in one place too long. Guess I have been running from the memories." Winona felt a sudden kinship with this man beside her. They were both carrying ghosts, both searching for something they could not quite name. "Is that why you were prospecting, looking for a fresh start?" "Something like that. Thought maybe if I found silver or gold, I could build something new, something that would not remind me of what I lost." He shook his head. "Foolish, really? You cannot outrun grief. It follows you wherever you go. But you can learn to live with it," Winona said quietly. "My mother used to say that grief is just love with nowhere to go. The pain never completely disappears, but eventually you find ways to carry it. Your mother sounds like she was wise." "She was. I wish I had more time with her." Winona adjusted the blanket, pulling it tighter around her shoulders. The cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the wind, but the fire continued to burn steady and bright. "This is strange, is it not? Two strangers sharing their deepest sorrows in a cabin in the middle of a snowstorm." "Maybe that is exactly why we can talk about it," Nathan said. "No history, no expectations. Just two people trying to stay warm and pass the time." But Winona suspected it was more than that. There was something about Nathan Wyatt that made her want to trust him, made her feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. She found herself studying his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes reflected the flames when he turned to look at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That I am glad you came along when you did," she said honestly. "Not just because of the storm. It has been a long time since I had someone to talk to. Really talk to, I mean." "I know what you mean." Nathan shifted slightly and their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. "Teaching must have been lonely in some ways, surrounded by people but not really connecting." "Yes, exactly that." Winona was surprised by his insight. "The other teachers were kind enough, but they were all so much older. They saw me as a child, not a colleague. And the girls were wonderful, but there was always that distance. I was their instructor, not their friend. And your brother? Thomas, you said. Are you close? We were, when we were children. He is 6 years older than me, and he used to look after me when our father was working long hours at the bank. But after I went to finishing school, and he headed west to seek his fortune, we lost touch. His letters became less frequent until they stopped altogether. Then 6 months ago, out of nowhere, he wrote about the Silver Strike and begged me to come. You must have been surprised. I was, but also relieved, I think, to know I still had family who wanted me. Winona felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away. I suppose that sounds pathetic. No, Nathan said firmly. It sounds human. We all need to belong somewhere, to someone. That is not pathetic. That is just being alive. They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable now, companionable. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the cabin felt almost cozy. Winona found her eyelids growing heavy, the warmth of the fire and the blanket and Nathan's presence lulling her towards sleep. You should rest, Nathan said gently. It has been a long day. What about you? I will keep the fire going. Make sure we do not freeze. Winona wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her. Wake me in a few hours, she murmured. We can take turns. She did not hear his response. Sleep claimed her suddenly and completely, dragging her down into darkness. When Winona woke, gray morning light was filtering through the gaps in the cabin walls. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie silence. She was lying on the floor near the fire, the blanket tucked carefully around her. Nathan sat with his back against the wall a few feet away, his eyes closed but his posture suggesting he had not truly slept. Nathan? She said softly. His eyes opened immediately. Morning. Storm broke about an hour ago. I was just about to check on the horses. Winona sat up, feeling stiff and cold despite the blanket. You stayed awake all night, did not you? Someone needed to tend the fire. I told you to wake me. You needed the rest more than I did. He stood and stretched, and she heard his back crack. I will go see about the horses. You should eat something. He was gone before she could argue further. Winona looked around the cabin in the gray light of dawn. It looked even more sparse and rough than it had the night before, but she felt a strange fondness for it nonetheless. This place had sheltered them through the storm, had given them a safe space to share their stories. Nathan returned a few minutes later, brushing snow from his shoulders. Horses are fine. There must be 2 feet of snow out there, maybe more. Trail will be impassable for at least a day or two. We are stuck here? Winona tried to keep the alarm from her voice. Looks that way. But we have enough supplies, and I can hunt if we need to. We will be all right. He paused, studying her face. Unless you would rather I try to get you to town anyway. Winona thought about it, then shook her head. No, if you say the trail is too dangerous, I believe you. I just hope my brother is not worried. He was expecting me a week from now, but still. He will understand. Weather in these mountains is unpredictable. Nathan moved to the fire and began building it back up. In the meantime, we might as well make ourselves comfortable. The day passed slowly. They rationed their food carefully, not knowing how long they would need to make it last. Nathan ventured out several times to check the conditions and gather more firewood from the covered pile behind the cabin. Each time he returned, he reported that the snow remained deep and the temperature brutally cold. To pass the time, they talked. Winona found herself telling Nathan things she had never shared with anyone, about her complicated feelings toward her stepmother, about the loneliness of her years at the academy, about her fears of what she might find when she reached Silver Ridge. Nathan listened with a focus and empathy that made her feel truly heard, truly seen. In turn, he shared more about his own past. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about how he had learned to ride before he could properly walk, about his decision to head west in search of adventure and opportunity. He spoke about Sarah with a mix of love and pain, describing how they had met at a church social and known immediately that they were meant to be together. She would have liked you, he said at one point, and Winona did not know how to respond to that. As afternoon faded into evening, they prepared another simple meal and settled back by the fire. The temperature was dropping again, and they huddled together under the blanket without discussion this time, their bodies fitting together more naturally than they had the night before. Nathan, Winona said quietly, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you believe in second chances, in the possibility of building something new after loss? He was quiet for a long moment. "I want to," he finally said. "I think that is why I keep moving, keep looking. I am searching for something, though I'm not always sure what it is." "Maybe it is not a thing," Winona suggested. "Maybe it is a person." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Winona felt her breath catch, felt her heart begin to race. Nathan reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough and calloused, but his touch was achingly gentle. "Winona," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I know we have only just met. I know this is crazy, but I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life." "I feel it too," she whispered. "I do not understand it, but I feel it." He leaned in slowly, and when his lips met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, full of all the hope and possibility that they had both thought lost forever. When they finally pulled apart, Winona was trembling, but not from cold. "I am falling in love with you," Nathan said, his forehead resting against hers. "I know it is too soon to say that. I know you probably think I am insane, but it is the truth." "Then we are both insane," Winona replied, "because I am falling in love with you too." They held each other as darkness fell, as the temperature outside plummeted and the stars emerged brilliant and cold overhead. Inside the cabin, wrapped in the shared blanket in each other's arms, they talked and kissed and dreamed about the future. Nathan told her about his plans to find a piece of land and start his own ranch. Something small at first, but with room to grow. Winona described her dream of opening a school, a place where children could learn not just facts and figures, but how to think and question and dream. "We could do both," Nathan said. "A ranch with a schoolhouse. Raise horses and children and teach them all to be strong and kind." "You are assuming I would say yes if you asked me to stay with you," Winona teased, though her heart was racing. "Are not you going to?" Nathan pulled back to look at her, suddenly uncertain. "Unless I have misread this completely. I am sorry. I should not have assumed—" "Nathan?" Winona put her hand on his cheek, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "I am saying yes, to all of it, to you." The joy that lit up his face was worth every mile of her difficult journey, every moment of fear and doubt and loneliness. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she lost herself in the warmth of him, the solid reality of this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. They made plans through the night, practical and impractical in equal measure. Nathan had some money saved from his work at the ranch, and Winona had a small inheritance from her parents that she had carefully guarded. Combined, it might be enough to buy land and build something lasting. "What about your brother?" Nathan asked. "You came all this way to see him." "I will still go to Silver Ridge," Winona said. "I need to make sure he is all right, and I want you to meet him. But after that, we can decide together where to settle." "Together," Nathan repeated, like he was tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." Morning came too soon and not soon enough. They woke tangled together under the blanket, and it took Winona a moment to remember where she was and why she felt so happy. Then she saw Nathan's face inches from her own, saw the tenderness in his eyes as he watched her wake, and remembered everything. "Good morning," he said softly. "Good morning." She stretched carefully, not wanting to move too far from the warmth of his body. "Do you think we can travel today?" "Let me check." He extracted himself from the blanket and went to the door. When he opened it, bright sunlight flooded the cabin, so brilliant on the snow that Winona had to shield her eyes. Nathan stepped outside, and she heard him moving around. When he came back, he was smiling. "Temperature is up. Snow is starting to melt. If we take it slow, I think we can make it to the next town by evening." They packed up their belongings and prepared the horses. The world outside the cabin was transformed, covered in a thick blanket of white that sparkled in the morning sun. It was beautiful, Winona thought, but also treacherous. Without Nathan, she would have died out here. As Nathan helped her onto her mare, his hands lingered on her waist. "Before we go," he said, "I want to say something." "What is it?" "These last 2 days have been the best of my life. I know that sounds strange, given that we were trapped in a snowstorm. But finding you, talking with you, learning who you are, Winona, you have given me hope again. You have given me a reason to believe in the future." Tears stung Winona's eyes. "You have given me the same gift. I came west running from loneliness, and I found you instead. That feels like more than luck. That feels like fate." "Then let us make a promise," Nathan said. "No matter what happens when we reach Silver Ridge, no matter what we find there, we stay together. We figure out the rest as we go, but we do it together." "I promise," Winona said solemnly. "Together." They rode out slowly, Nathan leading the way through the snow-covered trail. Progress was difficult, but the horses were strong and the weather held. As they descended from the higher elevations, the snow grew thinner and the air warmer. By mid-afternoon, they reached a point where the trail was clear enough for easier travel. As the sun began to set, they came to a small town nestled in a valley. A weathered sign proclaimed it to be Copper Creek, population 212. It was not much, just a main street lined with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a scattering of houses. But it looked like civilization after their time in the wilderness. They found a boarding house run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson, who gave them a knowing look when Nathan asked for 2 rooms. "Separate rooms," he emphasized, and Winona felt a rush of affection for him. Even in his eagerness to be with her, he was protecting her reputation. That night, after a proper meal and a hot bath, Winona lay in her small room and thought about everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she had been alone and frightened, convinced she had made a terrible mistake in coming west. Now she had Nathan, and with him, the promise of a future filled with love and purpose. There was a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, Nathan stood there, his hair still damp from his own bath, looking uncertain. "I know it is not proper," he said, "but I could not sleep without seeing you one more time. I will go if you want me to." Instead of answering, Winona pulled him inside and closed the door. They stood in the dim lamplight, looking at each other, and then they were kissing again, urgent and hungry. Nathan's hands tangled in her hair, and she clutched at his shoulders, pulling him closer. "Marry me," he said against her lips. "Tomorrow, here in Copper Creek. I do not want to wait." "Yes," Winona breathed. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married the next morning in the small church, with Mrs. Patterson and the minister's wife serving as witnesses. Winona wore her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, and Nathan had somehow managed to find a clean white shirt. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Winona felt something settle into place deep in her chest. This was right. This was real. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, and Winona discovered that physical love could be tender and passionate and joyful all at once. Nathan was patient and gentle, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking and laughing and making more plans for their future. "We should still go to Silver Ridge," Nathan said, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Make sure your brother is all right. Then we can decide where to settle." "What if he needs help?" Winona asked. "Mining is dangerous work, and he is alone out there." "Then we help him," Nathan said simply. "He is family now, my family." They left Copper Creek 2 days later, taking their time on the journey to Silver Ridge. The town, when they finally reached it, was everything Winona had feared and more. It was rough and dirty, thrown together in haphazard fashion as prospectors flooded in, seeking their fortunes. The streets were mud and the buildings were mostly canvas tents and rough wooden structures. Finding Thomas proved easier than expected. The bartender at the Silver Ridge Saloon knew exactly who they meant when Winona described her brother. "Sure, I know Tom Lancaster. Got a claim up on the North Ridge. Does pretty well for himself, or so I hear." They found Thomas's claim late in the afternoon. He was working the sluice when they rode up, his sleeves rolled up and his face lined with dirt and exhaustion. When he looked up and saw Winona, his face transformed. "Winnie," he said, using his childhood nickname for her. "Winnie, is that really you?" Winona slid from her horse and ran to embrace him. "It is me, Thomas. I got your letter. I came." They held each other for a long moment, and when they pulled apart, Winona saw tears on her brother's face. "I cannot believe you actually came all this way. I was afraid you would think I was crazy, writing to you after all these years." "You are my brother," Winona said simply. "Where else would I go?" She introduced Nathan, explaining briefly how they had met and married. Thomas looked shocked at first, then amused, then genuinely happy. "Leave it to my little sister to come west for one reason and end up married to a cowboy for another." "Former cowboy," Nathan corrected with a smile. Soon to be rancher, if all goes according to plan. They spent the evening at Thomas's small cabin, catching up on years of missed time. Thomas explained that his silver strike had been real, but modest. He was making a living, but not the fortune he had initially hoped for. More importantly, he was lonely. "I wrote to you because I realized how much I missed having family," he admitted. "Money is nice, but it does not mean much when you have no one to share it with." "Then come with us," Winona said impulsively. "We are going to buy land and start a ranch. We could use your help, and you could use a change of scenery." Thomas looked between his sister and her new husband. "You would want me there?" "Family sticks together," Nathan said firmly. "If you are willing to work hard and help us build something lasting, we would be glad to have you." Thomas agreed without hesitation. He sold his claim to another prospector for a fair price, packed up his belongings, and joined them on the journey south. They spent weeks traveling through California, looking for the right place to settle. Winona wanted somewhere with good land for both ranching and farming, close enough to a town for supplies, but far enough out for peace and quiet. They found it in a valley about 30 miles from Riverside, California. The land was beautiful, with rolling hills and a clear stream running through it. There was timber for building and good grass for horses. Best of all, the previous owner had given up and was selling cheap. Nathan used his savings to make the down payment, with Thomas contributing what he had earned from his claim. They spent the next months in a fury of work, building a house and barn, clearing land, and buying horses. Winona proved surprisingly adept at ranch work, learning to ride and rope alongside the men. Thomas, freed from the loneliness of prospecting, became cheerful and energetic in a way Winona remembered from their childhood. By the time spring arrived, they had a functioning ranch with a small herd of horses. Nathan proved to have an exceptional gift for training, and word spread quickly about the quality of his work. Ranchers from all over the valley began bringing their horses to him, providing steady income. Winona, meanwhile, had not forgotten her dream of teaching. She started with just 3 students, children of neighboring ranchers who had no school to attend. She taught them in the main room of their house, using whatever materials she could gather or make herself. The children were eager to learn, and their parents were grateful. One evening in early summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nathan pulled Winona close. "Are you happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Some days, I still cannot believe this is my life." "Our life," Nathan corrected, "and it is only the beginning." He was right. Over the next year, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Thomas met a widow from town named Margaret Harrison and began courting her seriously. Winona's school expanded to include 8 students, and the community came together to help build a proper one-room schoolhouse on the ranch property. And then, in the fall of 1883, Winona discovered she was pregnant. Nathan's joy was almost comical in its intensity. He immediately became overprotective, trying to keep Winona from doing any ranch work at all. She laughed at his concern, but secretly loved it, loved knowing how much he cared. "I am not made of glass," she told him one morning when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Nathan replied, taking the basket from her. "And not my wife." Their son was born in May of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's blue-gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Nathan's father. Nathan cried when he held his son for the first time, and Winona knew he was thinking of the child he had lost with Sarah. But these were tears of joy, not grief. "Thank you," he whispered to Winona as she recovered in their bed. "Thank you for giving me a family again, for giving me a life worth living." "We gave it to each other," Winona said, reaching for his hand. "That night in the cabin, when you shared your blanket and I shared my story, that was when our real life began." Thomas married Margaret that summer, and they built a small house on the other side of the ranch property. The 4 adults and baby Samuel became their own small community, working together to make the ranch succeed. Margaret, it turned out, was an excellent cook and gardener, and she helped Winona manage the household and the school. 2 years later, Winona gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named David and Sarah. Nathan insisted on the name Sarah, wanting to honor the wife he had lost while celebrating the wife he had found. It was a gesture of healing, and Winona loved him all the more for it. The school continued to grow, eventually housing 15 students from all over the valley. Winona hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from town named Clara who was passionate about education. Together, they created a curriculum that taught not just reading and arithmetic, but also science, history, and critical thinking. Nathan's reputation as a horse trainer spread beyond the valley. He began receiving requests from as far away as Los Angeles and San Diego. The ranch prospered, and they were able to buy more land and expand their herd. But more than the success and prosperity, what mattered was the love that bound them together. On cool evenings after the children were asleep and the work was done, Nathan and Winona would sit on their porch and watch the stars come out over the valley they had made their own. "Do you ever think about that night?" Nathan would ask. "The snowstorm, the cabin, how we found each other?" "Every day," Winona would reply. "I think about how terrified I was when my wagon broke down, how certain I was that I had made a terrible mistake in coming west, and then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had not known how to speak." "I was the one who was lost," Nathan would say. "I had been drifting for so long, running from my grief and my past. Then I found you, and suddenly I had a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of just survive." Thomas and Margaret eventually had 3 children of their own, and the ranch became a lively, chaotic place filled with the laughter of cousins playing together. The schoolhouse rang with the voices of children, learning and growing. The barn held horses that were known throughout Southern California for their quality and training. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Winona back to the cabin where they had sheltered from the storm. It took some doing to find it again, but Nathan remembered the way. The cabin was still standing, weathered but intact, a monument to the night that had changed both their lives. They stood together in the doorway, looking at the simple room where they had shared a blanket and their stories, where they had fallen in love over the course of 2 cold days and nights. "I want you to know something," Nathan said, taking both her hands in his. "If I could go back and choose any life, any path, I would choose this one. I would choose you, every single time." "We were both lost when we found each other," Winona replied, tears streaming down her face. "2 people running from pain, searching for something we could not name, and then a snowstorm stranded us in this cabin, and everything changed." "The best kind of change," Nathan agreed. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the place where their story had begun, grateful for every twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. They made love that night in the cabin, on blankets they had brought with them, and it was as tender and passionate as their first time. Afterwards, lying in Nathan's arms, Winona thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the fear and loneliness, all the loss and grief had led to this, to a love deeper than she had ever imagined possible, to a family and a home and a purpose that filled her days with meaning. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Nathan replied, "forever and always." Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books as much as horses. He helped Nathan with the training while also teaching at his mother's school. David was more adventurous, always pushing boundaries and exploring the hills around the ranch. And Sarah, their daughter, had inherited her father's gift with horses, forming bonds with the animals that seemed almost magical. Thomas and Margaret's children blended seamlessly into the family, creating a new generation that would carry on the legacy of the ranch. The cousins were as close as siblings, growing up together in the beautiful valley with its rolling hills and clear streams. When Nathan turned 45, he started talking about slowing down, about spending more time with Winona and less time training horses. "I want to travel with you," he said one evening, "see more of this country we have made our home, maybe visit the ocean or the mountains in the north." "We have time for all of that," Winona assured him. "We have the rest of our lives." They did travel, taking trips when they could, exploring California and beyond. But they always came back to the ranch, to the valley that had become their true home, the place they had built together from nothing but love and determination. On their 20th anniversary, they threw a party that drew people from all over the valley. The ranch had become a central part of the community, and Nathan and Winona were respected and beloved by their neighbors. As Winona looked around at the crowd of friends and family, at her grown children and their accomplishments, at her brother and his wife and their thriving household, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Nathan and Winona lay together in their bed, the window open to the warm summer breeze. "Do you remember what you asked me that second night in the cabin?" Winona said softly. "About whether I believed in second chances?" I remember, Nathan replied. I have been thinking about that question a lot lately, and I realize that what we have is more than a second chance. It is a whole new life, better than anything either of us had before. We did not just find each other. We created something entirely new together. We did, Nathan agreed, and I would not change a single moment of it. As they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, Winona thought back to that terrified young woman whose wagon had broken down on a lonely trail, who had believed she was facing disaster when in fact she was heading toward destiny. If she could go back and tell that version of herself what the future held, would she believe it? Would she understand that the cowboy who appeared in the snowstorm was not just her rescuer, but her soulmate, her partner, the other half of her heart? Probably not. Some things had to be lived to be believed. The ranch continued to flourish over the next decades. Samuel eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation, showing the same skill and dedication his father had. David, after a few years of adventuring through the West, returned home and started a breeding program that made their horses even more sought after. Sarah opened a second school in the nearby town, expanding on her mother's vision of accessible education for all children. Thomas and Nathan remained best friends as well as brothers, working side by side even as their hair turned gray. Margaret and Winona were like sisters, raising their children together and supporting each other through all of life's joys and challenges. As Winona entered her 50s, she began writing down the story of how she and Nathan had met. At first it was just for her own amusement, a way to preserve the memories before they faded. But her children begged to read it, and then their friends wanted copies, and eventually she had written a full account of their courtship and the early years of the ranch. You should publish this, Clara suggested one day. Clara had become more than just a teaching assistant. She was a dear friend and confidant. People would love to read about a real love story from the frontier. Winona was not so sure, but Nathan encouraged her. Your story, our story, it matters, he said. It shows that love can find you in the most unexpected places, even in the middle of a snowstorm when you think all is lost. So, Winona sent her manuscript to a publisher in San Francisco, not expecting much. To her shock, they accepted it eagerly. The book was published in 1905 under the title When the Snow Brought Love. It became a modest success, selling steadily and bringing letters from readers all over the country who were touched by the true story of two people who found each other in the wilderness. The money from the book allowed Winona to expand her school program even further, offering scholarships to children whose families could not afford books and supplies. It was deeply satisfying to know that sharing her love story was helping others access education and opportunity. Nathan loved to tease her about being a famous author. "Should I start calling you Mrs. Wyatt, the novelist?" he would ask with a grin. "You should call me what you have always called me," Winona would reply. "Your wife, your love, your partner. Always," Nathan would say and kiss her soundly. When they celebrated their 30th anniversary, both of their children were married with families of their own. The ranch had grown to include multiple houses for the extended family, a large barn complex, and the school that now served nearly 40 students. The valley had grown too, with more families settling and farming the rich land. Nathan was grayer now, his face more lined, but to Winona he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him riding out of the sunset. She had lines of her own, and her dark hair was streaked with silver, but Nathan still looked at her with the same wonder and love he had shown in that snowbound cabin so many years ago. 30 years, Nathan marveled as they stood together looking out over their land. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you on that trail with your broken wagon. Other times, it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true," Winona said, leaning into his embrace. "That night in the cabin, when we shared that blanket and our stories, it was the beginning of forever." Thomas and Margaret, celebrating their own anniversary just a few months later, agreed. "You two set the standard," Thomas told them at the party. "Watching how you love each other, how you built this life together, it has been an inspiration to all of us." As Winona looked around at the gathered family and friends, at the home they had created and the community they had fostered, she felt complete. The lonely teacher from Boston who had set out in fear and hope to meet her brother in a mining town seemed like a character from another life. That woman had been transformed by love into someone stronger, braver, more fully alive. And Nathan, the grieving widower who had been drifting through life trying to outrun his pain, had been transformed too. He had found purpose and joy again, had learned that the heart was capable of healing even from the deepest wounds. They had saved each other, those two desperate people in a snowstorm, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting. The years continued to roll by, bringing with them the inevitable challenges of aging. Nathan's knees grew stiff, making it harder for him to work with the horses the way he once had. Winona's eyes weakened, requiring spectacles for reading. But they faced these changes together, adjusting and supporting each other through each new limitation. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them with love and care. The ranch became a gathering place for the extended family, especially during holidays and celebrations. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children playing and adults debating and everyone coming together for meals. On Nathan's 60th birthday, Winona gave him a special gift, a painting of the cabin where they had met. She had commissioned it from a local artist, describing the scene in loving detail. The painting showed the small structure nestled among snow-laden pines, smoke rising from the chimney, glowing with warm light against the cold darkness of the storm. Nathan cried when he saw it. "This is perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is where our life really began." They hung the painting in their bedroom, where they could see it every morning when they woke and every night before they slept. It served as a constant reminder of the miracle of their meeting, of how close they had come to never finding each other at all. When Winona turned 60, Nathan took her on a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time she had been back to the city since leaving it over 30 years before. The place had changed dramatically, grown into a sprawling metropolis that bore little resemblance to the city she remembered. But Winona found she had no nostalgia for her old life. San Francisco felt like a place she had visited in a dream, beautiful but unreal. Her real life, her true life, was at the ranch with Nathan and their family. "No regrets?" Nathan asked as they stood on the wharf looking out at the bay. "Not a single one," Winona replied firmly. "My life began the day my wagon wheel broke. Everything before that was just the prelude." They returned home to find that Samuel and his wife had prepared a surprise party for Winona's birthday. The house and yard were decorated with lanterns and flowers, and it seemed like half the valley had turned out to celebrate. As Winona moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes, she was struck by the realization that all of this, the thriving ranch, the successful school, the large and loving family, had sprung from a single night of sharing warmth and stories in a cabin during a snowstorm. The ripples from that night had spread outward, touching dozens of lives, creating opportunities and connections that would endure for generations. That night, lying in bed with Nathan's arms around her, Winona whispered, "We did good, did we not?" "We did better than good," Nathan replied. "We did beautiful." When they reached their 40th anniversary, their children insisted on throwing a massive celebration. People came from all over California, including some of Winona's former students who had gone on to become teachers and lawyers and doctors. The party lasted for 2 days, with music and dancing and endless reminiscing. Nathan and Winona stood at the center of it all, older now, but still clearly devoted to each other. They danced together to a fiddle tune, moving slowly but gracefully, lost in each other despite the crowd around them. 40 years, Winona said softly. "Can you believe it?" "I can believe every moment," Nathan replied, "because I have lived them all with you." As the sun set on the second day of celebration, Nathan asked for everyone's attention. When the crowd quieted, he took Winona's hand and spoke. "Most of you know the story of how Winona and I met. It has become something of a legend in these parts, and Winona even wrote a book about it. But what some of you might not know is what I was thinking that day when I came across a stranded woman on the trail with a broken wagon. I had been thinking about Sarah, my first wife. It was the anniversary of her death, and I was lost in grief even though it had been years. I was considering giving up, just drifting until I drifted away completely. I had no purpose, no hope, no reason to keep going. And then I saw Winona, and something in me recognized her, even though we had never met. Something in me knew that if I could just get her to safety, if I could help this one person, maybe I could find a reason to help myself. I never imagined I would fall in love. I never imagined I would have another chance at family, at happiness, at building a life that mattered. But Winona gave me all of that and more. She saved my life that night in the cabin, just as surely as I saved hers. There was not a dry eye in the crowd. Winona was crying openly, and she pulled Nathan close, kissing him with all the passion and love of their early days. "You saved me too," she said when they finally pulled apart. "I was running from loneliness and pain, and you taught me that the answer was not in running, but in opening my heart, in taking a chance on love even when it seemed impossible." The party continued late into the night, but Nathan and Winona eventually slipped away to their room. They made love tenderly, gently, with the ease of long practice and deep knowledge of each other's bodies. Afterwards, they lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of celebration continuing outside. "No regrets?" Nathan asked, as he had so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Winona replied, as she always did. "You? My only regret is that we did not have more than one lifetime together," Nathan said. 40 years is not enough. I want 40 more. I want forever." "Then we will have to make every day count," Winona said softly. "Live each moment fully, love each other completely, and trust that whatever time we have is exactly what we need." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had thousands of times before. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, unchanging and eternal. The ranch slept around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love over fear. As the years advanced into their 70s, Nathan and Winona gradually stepped back from the daily operations of the ranch. Samuel had proven himself more than capable of managing things, and David and Sarah contributed their own talents and energy. Thomas, though also aging, remained active and engaged, his friendship with Nathan as strong as ever. Winona officially retired from teaching, though she continued to visit the school regularly and mentor the younger teachers who had taken over. Her book had inspired several other women to write their own frontier stories, and she took pride in having opened that door. Nathan spent his days in a rocking chair on the porch, watching the horses in the pasture and offering advice to anyone who asked. He moved more slowly now, and there was a tremor in his hands that had not been there before, but his mind remained sharp and his love for Winona undiminished. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1932, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was smaller and quieter than the 40th had been, but no less meaningful. As they cut the cake together, Nathan and Winona's hands shaking slightly as they held the knife, there was not a person present who doubted the depth and reality of their love. 50 years ago, I married the love of my life, Nathan said in his speech. I have never regretted it for a single moment. Winona, you are my heart, my home, my reason for being. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. Winona could barely speak through her tears. You are everything to me, she managed. Everything good in my life started the night you found me in that snowstorm. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for these 50 incredible years. They kissed to thunderous applause, and if the kiss was softer and briefer than it might have been in their youth, it was no less genuine or heartfelt. That night, in the quiet of their room, Nathan held Winona close. I am getting tired, he admitted quietly. My body is wearing out. I know, Winona said, fighting back tears. Mine too. I am not afraid of dying, Nathan continued. I have had a good life, a full life, more than I ever deserved. But I am afraid of leaving you. Do not, Winona said fiercely. Do not talk like that. We still have time. I know, but when the time comes, I need you to know something. I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life, that every moment with you was a gift, and that, if there is an afterlife, I will be waiting for you there. Winona cried then, deep wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Nathan held her and let her cry, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort and love. They did have more time, 3 more years, in fact. 3 years of quiet days on the porch, of visits from family, of watching the ranch continue to thrive under the care of the next generation. 3 years of holding hands and sharing memories and being grateful for every sunrise. Nathan died peacefully in the spring of 1935, in his sleep with Winona beside him. He was 78 years old, and he had lived to see his children and grandchildren settled and happy. His last words, spoken the evening before, had been, I love you, to Winona. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Nathan had touched. They spoke of his kindness, his skill with horses, his role in building the community. But the most moving tribute came from Samuel, who described his father as a man who had taught him that real strength lay not in physical prowess, but in the courage to love openly and completely. Winona bore her grief with dignity, but everyone could see how much it cost her. She had lost her other half, the person who had known her best and loved her most. The house felt empty without Nathan's presence, and she found herself talking to him constantly, telling him about her day, asking his opinion, imagining his responses. But she did not give up. She continued to live, to engage with her family, to take joy in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She wrote a second book, this one about building the ranch and raising a family on the frontier. And she spent hours looking at the painting of the cabin, remembering that snowy night when everything had changed. Winona lived for 6 more years without Nathan. She died in the winter of 1941, at the age of 83. Her last words were, "I am coming, Nathan. Wait for me." She was laid to rest beside her husband in the small cemetery on the ranch property. The headstone, chosen by their children, read simply, "Nathan and Winona Wyatt, together in life, together in death. Their love built this place." The ranch continued to thrive for generations after their deaths. The school they had founded expanded into a full academy. The horses bred from their original herd became famous throughout the West. And their descendants carried on their legacy of hard work, education, and above all, love. The cabin where they met was eventually turned into a small museum, preserved as a testament to the power of chance encounters and the transformative nature of love. Visitors came from all over to see the place where Nathan and Winona's story had begun, to stand in the small room and imagine 2 desperate people finding hope and connection in the midst of a snowstorm. And every year on the anniversary of that fateful night, the family gathered at the ranch to tell the story again, to remind themselves and their children that love could find you in the most unexpected places, that second chances were possible, that from the darkest moments could come the brightest futures. The story of the cowboy who shared his blanket and the woman who shared her story became part of the family mythology, passed down through the generations as both inspiration and instruction. It taught that courage came in many forms, that vulnerability could be a strength, that opening your heart to another person was always a risk worth taking. Nathan and Winona's great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch as the 20th century progressed. They modernized the operations, added new buildings and technology, but they never forgot the foundation on which everything rested. Every decision was made with an eye toward what Nathan and Winona would have wanted, what values they had held dear. The schoolhouse, now a full academy with multiple buildings and dozens of teachers, carried on Winona's vision of education as a tool for empowerment and growth. Scholarships established in her name helped hundreds of students pursue their dreams. And every graduate heard the story of how their school had begun, with one woman teaching 3 children in the main room of a ranch house, driven by her belief that knowledge could change lives. The horse breeding program, descended from Nathan's original training work, produced some of the finest quarter horses in California. Ranchers throughout the West sought out Wyatt Ranch horses, knowing they would be getting animals bred and trained with the patience and skill Nathan had pioneered. His techniques, passed down through the generations, became the standard by which others measured their work. But beyond the tangible legacies, beyond the land and the buildings and the bloodlines, what Nathan and Winona had really left behind was the example of their love. In a world that often valued toughness and independence above all else, they had shown that true strength came from connection, from allowing yourself to need and be needed by another person. Their story reminded people that life could change in an instant, that fate or chance or providence could intervene when least expected. A broken wagon wheel, a gathering storm, a cowboy riding south for the winter, these small, seemingly insignificant details had combined to create one of the great love stories of the frontier. As the decades passed and the Wild West became history, as cars replaced horses and cities replaced wilderness, the story of Nathan and Winona endured. It was told at weddings and anniversaries, used as proof that true love existed and that finding it was worth any risk. Young couples starting out would visit the cabin museum and promise each other they would face their challenges together, just as Nathan and Winona had. The painting of the cabin, the one Winona had commissioned for Nathan's 60th birthday, remained in the main house, hanging in a place of honor where everyone could see it. It served as a reminder of where everything had started, of the night when two broken people found each other and began the process of healing. And on cold winter nights when snow fell on the valley, the family would gather around the fireplace and someone would inevitably say, "Tell us about the snowstorm." Then the story would be told again, never growing old, never losing its power. The broken wagon wheel, the gathering darkness, the cowboy appearing like an answer to prayer, the cabin, the shared blanket, the stories exchanged by firelight, the falling in love, the hasty marriage, the building of a life and a legacy. The story always ended the same way, with Nathan and Winona old and gray, surrounded by the family and community they had created, still holding hands and still deeply in love. It was a reminder that some things endured, that some bonds were strong enough to weather any storm, that love chosen consciously and nurtured carefully could last a lifetime and beyond. Nathan and Winona Wyatt had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. They had chosen love when it would have been easier to remain guarded and alone. They had built something lasting from nothing but determination and devotion. And in doing so, they had created a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Their story was the Wild West at its best, not the violence and lawlessness that dominated so many tales, but the courage, resilience, and hope of people who ventured into the unknown and created community and meaning from raw wilderness. It was a story of transformation, of two people who had been lost finding their way home to each other. And it all began on a snowy night in 1881, when a cowboy shared his blanket and a woman shared her story, and two lonely hearts found the connection they had been seeking all along. From that single night of vulnerability and trust grew a love that shaped not just two lives, but countless others, spreading outward like ripples on a pond until an entire valley bore the mark of their devotion. That was the real magic of Nathan and Winona's story. It proved that love was not just a feeling, but a force, capable of building and creating and transforming. It showed that the most important journeys were not the ones we planned, but the ones we stumbled into, guided by something greater than ourselves toward the people and places we needed most. And so, the story lived on, told and retold, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever felt lost or alone or afraid. It whispered that rescue could come from unexpected quarters, that love could find you in the darkest moments, and that sharing your story with the right person could change everything. The cowboy and his blanket, the woman and her story, the cabin and the snow, these simple elements had combined to create something timeless and true, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and the courage it takes to open your heart, even when you have every reason to keep it closed.